John Paul Chase, The Enigma of Alcatraz. The tumultuous landscape of America's Great Depression gave rise to a criminal underworld teeming with figures whose exploits became the stuff of legend. While names like John Dillinger and babyface Nelson dominated headlines, a less flamboyant but equally significant character carved out his own indelible mark on this era. His life, deeply entangled with some of the period's most infamous outlaws, is particularly notable for his extensive tenure at the formidable Alcatraz prison and the relentless, almost personal pursuit he endured from none other than FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. The early years in a fateful partnership. Chase's early life offered little indication of the criminal path he would eventually forge. He left grade school to work on a ranch, later becoming an assistant machinist in a railroad yard. In 1926, after being fired from the railroad, he took a job as a chauffeur for a professional gambler in Reno, Nevada. The subsequent years saw him engage in bootlegging across Sausalito and San Francisco. Yet, it wasn't until the early 1930s, specifically around March 1932, that his life took a drastic turn with his association with Lester Joseph Gillis, better known as Babyface Nelson. The exact circumstances of their initial meeting remain shrouded in speculation, though a persistent tale suggests Chase was a getaway driver in a contract killing Nelson carried out in Reno. Crime historians generally concur that Reno was the most probable meeting point, given Nelson's underworld connections and his frequent use of the city as a hideout when not in Chicago or the Midwest. The criminal collaboration between Chase and Nelson began in earnest on October 23, 1933, with their first joint bank robbery in Brainerd, Minnesota, yielding a substantial $32,000. Their criminal circle expanded to include other outlaws like Charles Fisher, Tommy Carroll, and Homer Van Meter. By March 1934, Nelson had aligned himself with John Dillinger. While Chase's precise entry into the Dillinger gang is unclear, some accounts place him at a robbery in Mason City, Iowa. He primarily served as Nelson's gopher in the Chicago area. His duties included procuring meals, weapons, ammunition, and relaying messages between Nelson and Dillinger. This relatively minor role likely explains his absence from the infamous shootout with the FBI at the Little Bohemia Lodge in Manitowish Waters, Wisconsin on April 22, 1934. The Vanishing Witness and the Road to Alcatraz. A darker chapter in Chase's criminal career unfolded in the aftermath of the Mason City robbery. Nelson and Chase fled west of Reno, where their former bosses, Bill Graham and Jim McKay, were facing a federal mail fraud case. Years later, the FBI concluded that on March 22, 1934, Nelson and Chase abducted the key witness Roy Fritsch and allegedly silenced him forever. Fritsch's dismembered body, though never recovered, was believed to have been dumped down an abandoned mine shaft. The details surrounding Roy Fritsch's disappearance are chilling. Fritsch was last seen in Reno, Nevada, on March 22, 1934. He left his home at 7:45 p.m., watched a movie at the Majestic Theater, and was seen by a friend at the corner of Sierra and Court Streets afterward. He never made it home. At the time, Fritsch, a cashier at the Riverside Bank of Reno, lived with his mother and two sisters and was slated to testify against Graham and McKay in their upcoming fraud case. Fritsch had already testified against 4 other suspects in the same case in January 1934, but vanished before he could testify again. Nelson emerged as a prime suspect. He had previously driven for Graham and was a frequent visitor to Reno, arriving on March 20th and departing on the very day Fritsch disappeared. Nelson later admitted to having done a job for Graham and McKay. In 1935, John Paul Chase confessed to being with Nelson and witnessed Fritsch's murder. He described Nelson waiting for Fritsch on the street, then beating him with his pistol before taking him to a garage and shooting him in the head. Chase attempted twice to lead FBI agents to the mine shaft where he claimed Fritsch's body was dumped, but it was never found. He was brought to New York to testify before a grand jury, but refused to reiterate his story in court. Years later, while incarcerated at Alcatraz, Chase revisited the grim details with investigators. He recounted how he and Nelson had observed Fritsch leave the theater and then waited for him near his house. When Fritsch reached the corner, Nelson blocked his path with a black Buick sedan, initiated a fight, knocked Roy down, and threw him into the back of the car. They then drove out of town, eventually pulling off the highway near Urington, where they killed Fritsch and burned his corpse. However, when G-Men took Chase from Alcatraz to pinpoint the location, he couldn't find it. Authorities dismissed his efforts as a ploy to secure a break and a pleasure trip to Nevada, and the investigation into Roy Fritsch's murder, though a practical certainty, ended without the recovery of his body. Chase's first confirmed robbery with the Dillinger gang occurred on June 30th, 1934. Alongside Dillinger, Nelson, Van Meter, and two others, they robbed a bank in South Bend, Indiana for $29,890. This sum was a disappointment compared to the gang's previous hauls. And compound matters, a local police officer was killed during their escape. Dillinger and Van Meter were killed by the FBI within the next 2 months. Chase once again fled with Nelson back to Reno. Their return to Chicago proved fatal. On November 26th, they stole a car and drove to Wisconsin to a safe house. Discovering federal agents staking out their hideout, they turned back toward Illinois. The following day, near Barrington, they drove into an FBI ambush. Nelson was mortally wounded in the ensuing gun battle, but not before he managed to kill agents Samuel Cowley and Herman Hollis, allowing Chase to escape. The official report in Chase's Alcatraz inmate case file provided the following summary of the shootout. On November 26, 1934, John Paul Chase and Lester Joseph Gillis, baby-faced Nelson, who was accompanied by his wife Helen Gillis, came to Chicago in a Ford pickup truck which Chase had purchased in Las Vegas, Nevada under the name of Roy Mead. In Chicago, they stole a Ford sedan into which they transferred guns, ammunition, and personal effects. On the afternoon of November 27th, all three drove to Lake Como, Wisconsin. At that time, 2 federal warrants were outstanding for Lester Gillis, and he was also wanted for the murder of Special Agent Carter Baum. At Lake Como, Gillis talked with an FBI agent who was unaware of Gillis' true identity until Chase and Gillis had driven away. Information that these 2 men had left Lake Como, Wisconsin, was forwarded to the Chicago office of the FBI. FBI agent McDade and Ryan encountered Chase and Gillis on the highway. Chase, who was sitting in the back seat of the car, covered the agents with an automatic monitor rifle and ordered the agents to pull over to the side of the road. The agent stepped on the accelerator and succeeded in outdistancing the car in which Chase and Gillis were riding, after Chase had fired 5 shots at the car in which the agents were riding. Meantime, agents Hollis and Cowley began pursuing the car driven by Gillis. At the entrance to Northside Park in Barrington, Gillis suddenly turned off the Northwest Highway and stopped. Agents Cowley and Hollis, being unable to stop, proceeded on the Northwest Highway about 200 feet further. Before the agents were able to get out of the car, Chase and Gillis were out of their car and began shooting at the agents. During this battle chase, and Gillis used automatic rifles and a machine gun, Agent Hollis and Cowley were killed as a result of the battle, and Gillis was mortally wounded. Chase and Gillis then transferred the guns and other material from the Ford they had been driving into the Hudson sedan, which had been driven by the agents, and Chase drove the Hudson away from the scene with Mr. and Mrs. Gillis. Eyewitnesses stated that Chase and Gillis fired upon the agents before the agents had time to get out of their automobile. Alone and without allies in Chicago, Chase managed to vanish temporarily. Initially, authorities and journalists speculated that either Alvin Karpus or John Red Hamilton was the second gunman in the Barrington shootout, leaving Chase unidentified. Seizing the opportunity, Chase answered a newspaper ad 4 days later, using the alias Elmer Rockwood, to transport a car to Seattle, Washington. While he was traveling west, Helen Nelson, baby-faced Nelson's wife, provided his name to federal agents, marking the first time authorities actively pursued him. On December 27, 1934, police finally arrested Chase at Mount Shasta, California, where he was working at a state fish hatchery. He was then extradited to Chicago. Chase became the first individual charged under a newly enacted law that made killing a federal agent a federal crime. On March 24, 1935, Chase was tried and convicted for the murder of Agent Sam Cowley and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was officially committed to Alcatraz on March 31, 1935. John Paul Chase, prisoner number 238, holds the distinction of being among the first individuals sent directly to Alcatraz prison. Only Alvin Karpis served a longer sentence there than Chase's nearly 2 decades, with Chase's incarceration lasting until September 21st, 1954. His presence on the rock marked him as one of its most enduring prisoners, confined for murder and robbery. Life within Alcatraz was rigidly structured, but inmates did have certain privileges designed to occupy their time. As a maximum security, minimum privilege institution, essential needs like food and medical care were provided, and prisoners had access to a library containing 15,000 books and 75 popular magazine subscriptions. They were also allowed to engage in artistic pursuits and play stringed instruments in their cells. It was during this period that Chase developed a notable interest in painting, reportedly encouraged by Father Clark, the prison's Catholic chaplain. At one point, Alcatraz even brought in an art instructor from San Francisco to teach formal painting techniques. Chase became known for his artwork, particularly a panoramic series of oil paintings depicting the San Francisco Bay Area, including a unique view from the island itself. He also created sketch drawings, including one from 1944 titled Belt Sanding, which illustrated principal work assignments within the prison. These pieces were sometimes displayed in prison exhibitions and small art galleries. Beyond his artistic endeavors, he worked as a cobbler and a variety of other assignments during his years on Alcatraz. Despite his lengthy incarceration, J. Edgar Hoover's animosity toward Chase, fueled by his involvement in the death of Agent Cowley and Hollis, persisted. Hoover personally intervened in Chase's first parole hearing in 1950, ensuring his ejection. He even ordered the surveillance of the prison chaplain who supported Chase's parole, vehemently stating in a memorandum to his field agents, "Watch closely and endeavor to thwart the efforts of this priest, who should be attending to his own business, instead of trying to turn loose on society such mad dogs." During his time at Alcatraz, Chase received several disciplinary reports for various infractions, including talking in line, agitation, insolence, destruction of government property, attempting to obtain extra food, and possession of contraband. However, his last report was in October 1953, and his conduct record remained clear thereafter. A significant legal aspect of Chase's Alcatraz years involved the untried murder charge for Agent Herman Hollis. The indictment, filed in December 1934, remained pending for decades. For the first 7 years of his incarceration at Alcatraz, Chase was subjected to a silent system, severely restricting communication with other prisoners, with only strictly censored conversations with his brother allowed. This environment made it virtually impossible for him to actively pursue a speedy trial. In 1955, a federal judge ultimately dismissed the indictment, ruling that the 21-year delay clearly violated Chase's constitutional right to a speedy trial, a critical decision that would later impact his eligibility for parole. Prison file notes from November 2nd, 1956, Annual Review. Committed name, Chase John Paul Reg. November 2nd, 1956. Chase, a 51-year-old white male, was sentenced on March 28, 1935, in the United States District Court, Chicago, Illinois, to a life sentence for the killing of Samuel Cowley, a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This incident occurred at Barrington on November 26, 1934. At the time, Chase was accompanied by Lester Joseph Gillis, also known as Babyface Nelson. In addition to Special Agent Cowley, another FBI Special Agent, Herman Hollis, was also killed. Gillis subsequently succumbed to wounds sustained in the gun battle with the agents. Chase was not tried for the killing of Agent Hollis. A detainer was subsequently filed against Chase for the killing of Agent Hollis. He was not tried for this charge, and on October 17, 1955, in the District Court at Chicago, the court dismissed the indictment for the killing of Agent Hollis, citing that Chase had not been granted a speedy trial. Currently, there are no detainers on file against Chase. However, there is a notified notice from the FBI, Kansas City, Missouri. Chase was committed to Alcatraz, California, on March 31, 1935, and was received in transfer at Leavenworth on September 24, 1954. While at Alcatraz, Chase received a total of 12 disciplinary reports for violations, including talking in line, agitation, insolence, destruction of government property, attempting to obtain extra food, and possession of a contraband blade and knife. His last report was in October 1953. Since that date, his institutional conduct record has been clear. Since he began serving his sentence, Chase has earned a total of 920 days of industrial good time as of September 30th, 1956. He has been working in the shoe factory since November 1954, where he is receiving entirely satisfactory work reports as a custom shoemaker. His supervisor states that he is performing very well on this assignment, and despite being relatively new to the job, he is making entirely satisfactory progress. A report from the Education Department indicates that since the report of October 11, 1955, he has completed courses in sales and human relations and speech and sociology from Kansas University. A report from the Catholic chaplain states, he is a Catholic by preference. He has attended services regularly every Sunday. He requested religious instruction and is enrolled in the current class. His disposition is excellent. Chase is single and has never been married. Both of his parents are deceased. He has a brother, Charles Chase, residing in San Francisco, California, and another brother, Ambrose Chase, living in San Rafael, California. He maintains normal correspondence with these brothers. He has had no visits since he was received at Leavenworth. Chase has been in close custody status since he began serving his sentence. He became eligible for a parole consideration on March 27, 1950. He applied for parole on January 4, 1955, and after considering his case, the United States Board of Parole denied his application. Chase was interviewed prior to the preparation of this report. He stated that he had no institutional problems, and his general program was satisfactory, except that he would appreciate a reduction in custody, feeling this would allow him a few more privileges around the institution. He also stated that he would like to be granted the privilege of parole, because he felt that if released, he could live as a law-abiding citizen. Since being received at Leavenworth, he has made no special or unusual requests for special privileges. His general attitude has been good. In September 1954, Chase was transferred to Leavenworth. His second appeal for parole was once again denied due to Hoover's persistent efforts. Hoover had publicly stated his intention to prosecute Chase for the murder of Hollis if he were ever released. However, a federal judge vetoed this, ruling that a 21-year delay in prosecuting the crime clearly violated Chase's constitutional right to a speedy trial. John Paul Chase remained incarcerated for another decade. Finally, despite J. Edgar Hoover's ongoing protests, he was released on parole on October 31, 1966, after 32 years of imprisonment. He returned to the Bay Area and worked as a custodian at St. Joseph Seminary in Los Altos, California, until his death from cancer on October 5, 1973. He outlived his formidable adversary, J. Edgar Hoover, by 1 year, 5 months, and 3 days, a testament to his remarkable resilience in the face of a lifetime defined by crime, confinement, and the unwavering scrutiny of the federal government. If you've enjoyed this Alcatraz prisoner profile, please consider subscribing to our channel for notifications on future releases.